Hi, Lisa Gifford here, and today we're going to be doing the Dancing Diamond template set by Martelli. The Dancing Diamond table runner and quilt, that's the pattern that comes in this set. What Martelli has done is that they have created templates. So the design of the Dancing Diamond pattern was designed by Nicole C. Chambers Kaya for Tiger Lily Press. So the supplies that you need to be able to make this project is you're going to need the pattern and the template set, and I'm going to show the templates here so that you can see them. They come with fussy cut windows. So you've got 5 pieces, one that doesn't have anything on it. This is A and B. Then you've got a C, D, E, and an F. And then we have fussy cut windows if you want to use the fussy cut windows for these templates. So those are the main components plus the pattern that you get in the kit. Now, some additional supplies that's going to be helpful but not necessary is the 7 by 9 inch rectangle template. It's a 7 by 9 inch. It actually has a fussy cut window. Some wide mouth clips. You're going to need some scissors. Now, these next 2 items is imperative. You're going to need Elmer's school glue. It's very important that you have Elmer's school glue. I don't know if you can do this without it. And you're going to need starch. Lots and lots and lots of starch. There's Best Press. This is why I just picked this up at the grocery store because I used up everything that I had. But you need to starch all of your fabrics before you even do any of your cutting. And instead of just starching yardage, we're going to talk about cutting strips, starching those. They'll make it a little bit easier for you. Some pins, a little bit of maybe 505 spray. Now, you can use a glue stick, but I found that the glue stick didn't work very well. It was the Elmer's glue that worked the best for us. So Martelli does have a glue stick. And I'm going to show this little tool. This is a tailor's press. This is big. But if you have a seam press, one of the smaller ones, I found that this worked very well for holding my seams in place and cooling them and making them light and very flat. So if you have a seam press, it'd be the time to pull it out because it would be a really good tool to use for this. When you get your set, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to open it up and you're going to get your pattern out. And I forgot to mention a couple other items that you're going to need is you're going to need a manila folder. And if you have the Martelli 7-inch block, you might need that too. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to open up your pattern. And there are several pages here. I want to say there's like 6 or 7 pages to the pattern itself. And then just kind of have it laid out because you're going to refer to this quite a bit as you're doing this block. And then there's these other 2 pieces that are in here. These are the paper patterns. And we're not using these except this one. You're going to need, and you can see I actually cut it out. You're going to need to use template B. We don't have a template for template B. We have to actually cut this out and glue this to your heavy cardboard or heavy manila folder. Now you're not going to be using it for cutting, it's going to be for pressing. So that's one of the first prep works you need to do is you cut this out right here on this line. Do not go outside the line. You want to cut right there on the line. And then you're going to glue that to the manila folder and glue it so it's nice and flat and dry. You don't want it to wrinkle up, and this is kind of dirty because I've been using it because you use this a lot. You use this for every single block. So you're going to glue this and then you're going to cut that out. And then you're going to set that aside because there is some prep work. So I'm getting you through the prep work before you actually start making the block. Now when I first read the pattern, it took me a minute to wrap my mind around it because I thought we were going to be sewing curves. You are not sewing any curves. That's why this project is so amazing. And she actually says it on the very front. It says featuring a new and fast technique. So that's what we're learning. We're learning a new and fast technique using the Martelli templates and to make this amazing, amazing quilt. So I'm going to go ahead and set these aside. You won't even be needing these at all if you got the templates. And then I got confused because it had double. Well, I guess it's so that if you were to cut one out and you need to do it again. So I only needed this one piece and I was able to make all the blocks. But if you wanted to change it out, you could change it. So this is now set aside. The second prep work that you need to do is it actually says in the pattern you need a 10-inch square. So if you look at the fabrics on the back, it actually says a scrap 10-inch square. So I just had a 10-inch square. And it talks about in the pattern how you got to draw this grid line because you need a 7-inch block. So if you have a 7-inch square template, set this down here. Actually, yeah, set it down here and draw your 7-inch square. And know now that you're going to be actually using the inside of your lines. So I actually have this one here. And this is kind of messed up because I used it to make this block. This is a guide for your pieces placement. So you need to make this, and you'll be using it over and over and over again, and then you're going to just set it aside. So you just make it, put your line on there, make your 7-inch square in the center. You don't need to even worry about this, but you need to have it in center of a 10-inch square because this is what you lay everything on to do one of the steps. So I'm going to now set that aside. Now it says you need to cut, if you're looking at the instructions, it's telling you that you have to cut these rectangles 7 by 9 inches. Do not cut them until you have prepped your fabric. This is a project that can be done with regular quilting cotton and batiks, and you can actually do a blend. And in the projects that I've made, I did a blend of some with batiks and some with regular quilting cotton. Now the main focal fabric is a quilting cotton. So if you're going to do, say, the table runner, she actually says how much you're going to need. You're going to need 1.25 yards of your main theme fabric, and then your accents, you're going to need fat quarters of 6 fabrics. Well, you're making a total of 28 blocks, I think. So I chose, yes, 6. 7? I'm trying to remember. Yeah, 7. I chose 7 because I wanted 4 of each block in here. So that's what I had done. So you could make it as scrappy as you want, but I wanted to have some something to be continuous. So I had 28 total blocks that's being made. So that's important. So what I did was I took my fabric and I cut them into 10-inch strips, and I'm going to lay one out here because I believe that's what I had done. Yeah, I cut my strips with the fabric 10 inches. So I had this long 10-inch piece, and I think I have one right here. So I have these long pieces that are 10 inches. So what I had done was I took that 10-inch strip to my ironing station and I starched everything. So I got my starch and I just sprayed it and I got it damp, and then I did it on the back side. I starched all of the fabrics, including the batiks, nice and crisp. So you can see, like this one here, it's nice and crisp. And then also all the fabrics that I had done. So every strip that I cut, or if you were using the fat quarter, every piece was completely starched before I did any of my cutting. Do not cut your 7 by 9s until after the fabric has been starched and pressed. And I'll tell you why, because when you're getting that fabric wet, you see it actually draw in a little bit. So if you was to cut your 7 by 9 inch rectangles before you actually had them pressed, then when you go to press them and get them with the starch on there, then they're going to be smaller and then your template's not going to fit on there. So be sure to do your cutting of your strips or your fat quarters, starch them first before you cut your 7 by 9 inch rectangles. So after I had it all stretched and I ironed it until it was dry, then I grabbed my 7 by 9 inch template and I just set it on that piece, and I did each one. For every 7 by 9 inch rectangle, it's going to make 2 blocks. So you've got to have 14 of the, I'm going to refer to instructions because it's actually on here and it's on page 2. If you look at, page 1, it's going to tell you you've got to have 14 of your theme fabric, so that's going to make 28, and then you've got to have 14 rectangles of your multicolors, of your other colors. So that's why I chose 7, because then I'm able to get 2 from each one. So that's where you need to have. You cut those out, and then the next step after you cut them out, so I'm going to grab a rotary cutter. I'm just going to go ahead and cut this one out. Now, be sure to read the instructions completely through. This is not a project where you can stack up your fabrics and do all of your cutting as it came off the bolt. It specifically states in the instructions that when you're cutting all of your pieces, you're going to be doing your cutting. Now that's on page 2. It talks about stack 4 layers of the 7x9 fabric rectangles on top of each other, all the wrong sides facing up. Not right sides facing up, but wrong sides facing up. So you want to flip it over. Your wrong side is what's facing up. And even if you were doing all of your other pieces, of course, batik, there's no right or wrong, but here is a fabric here. So all the wrong sides have to be facing up to do your cutting. So, and then you've got to be very sure when you are putting them together that all of your edges line up perfectly. So one of the things that you could do when you're going to do your cutting with your 7x9, I just laid it out, all of my fabric across, and I stacked them up, wrong sides up. So they were all stacked up that way. And I would do 4 at a time. So I have my 4 laying here that were cut with the 7x9. And then the next step is you're going to be doing your cutting. So that's where you're going to grab what is called template A, or the one that doesn't have anything on it, because this is like A and B, but this is A. You're going to be using A. And you're just going to set the template at one of those corners. And you're going to do this with all 14 of the color pieces and all 14 of the theme fabrics. So you're going to be cutting 2 out of each piece. So you're just going to continue to cut all of them till all of them are cut. So I've got my 4 stacked up here, and the 45 rotary cutter goes perfectly onto there. And then I just set that aside. Then I just turn this around, and I repeat that same thing on the other side. I just lay my template right here at this corner, making sure that's all lined up onto here. And then I go ahead and I cut this off. And there is some scraps with this project, so I just set those aside, put them in a little pile to make a doggy bed. So there's the pieces here, and then the same thing with the color, with the theme. Be sure it is wrong side up, and you're going to do your cuts. The thing that actually takes the longest in making this quilt is probably all the prep work. It just takes time to get all of your ironing done. That was what took the longest, was getting all of my strips cut. Didn't take long at all. But when I'm now ironing every single one, I made sure every single piece was very wet, and then ironed it till it was dry. So here's the 2 here. So after you have all of your pieces cut, we're just going to follow along as the instructions state, because it actually, when you get to where you're doing the sewing part, that don't take long. It is the prep work that takes the longest. So then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to choose which side is going to be the one that is going to overlap on top of the other. And I chose the colored piece. So this is where you're going to pull into play the paper one that you had made with your manila folder. You're going to take this to your ironing station, and I found right side is going down. Then you're going to take this. Now you see why I've got this a little messed up here. So what I had done was I didn't want this to slip, because you're going to set this, the print side down, onto the wrong side of your piece. And it's going to line up right here on this edges, right here. And this is why we didn't cut a template B, because if you see on the template, it is smaller. And you're not doing any cutting with template B. You're just using this piece for doing your iron to iron on. And don't think that you can use plastic, because I did try some plastic thinking I could use plastic in place, and it doesn't work because the iron's going to melt it. So use the manila folder and glue it onto here. Now, what I had done, so I got it to set a little bit onto here without sliding, this is where a little bit of my spray, I would just tap this with a little bit of spray, so it'd be a little bit tacky, or you can hit it with a glue stick just so that it's a little bit tacky. I would let that dry for just a second. Now it's going to be on the wrong side, so I'm going to set this down, line up my edges. I'm lining up the corner, the right angles here. And it goes all the way up to that straight edge right here. So you see that? That's all that you got right there. Now I'm going to grab the iron and I'm going to show you what the next step is. And you're going to be doing this same step with every single one of them. And that's with your theme. You're not going to do it with your colored fabric. I chose to do it with the theme. So you're going to take this right here. You got your iron up and on. And there's just no way to do it. I tried to think I could use like one of the little iron buddies, but you've got to now take your fingers and you're going to kind of roll this back. And because you're on a bias, it's going to all roll back. And you want it to roll back to where it's about, looks like 1/4 of an inch all the way back. And if you need to reposition it, make sure you're at that very edge. That's the time to do it. If you don't think it's going to be enough, but it needs to be at least 1/4 of an inch that you are rolling back. That's why it was really good to have that little bit of a tackiness on the paper template, because it stays in place. It's not sliding on you. And then I just kind of roll this back with my fingers, and I got my iron here, and I'm just rolling it back as I am ironing this through. Now this is where having your clapper or your seam setter is going to work. So I'm going to just continue getting this on here, rolling it back. And that's why you can't use plastic, because your iron is right here on this. And then you're going to pull this off. Then I take it and I just kind of slide it to me. The fold is on my side, so I'm kind of sliding it to me, getting that seam underneath there. And now I'm tapping it again with iron, just pressing it down. Just taking my fingers and just kind of rolling it under and getting that iron all the way through it. And since you're doing basically 28 of these, I kind of just sort of stacked them up. Then I just set my clapper tool right there on top of that seam. And then I just kept going and kept going and kept going, and I just do the next one. So this is sitting there on the seam. I'm going to go ahead and get the next one done. Same thing. I kind of put the point to me, grab my template. I'm lining up that point, getting it to the very edge. I mean, literally to the very edge. Well, I don't even want to see any of the fabric at the edge of my little template here. I have it right there at the very edge. I don't want to see any of that, because that's going to take away from the folding. If you need to reposition it, reposition it. So I loved having that little bit of tackiness onto that paper template. And then again, just start rolling it back. Peel your paper off and just keep repeating that. And I just kind of set it down and then kind of roll it towards me. It rolls that seam under, and just press that down. Give it just a good press. And this is where then I went ahead and just grabbed my one that's underneath my clapper. And as it cooled, it set that seam and it made it nice and flat to work with for the very next step. I mean, you don't have to. I just found if I didn't use that, my seam would kind of roll up a little bit because nothing's really holding it down. All right, so my seams are all set and they're nice and flat. So you're going to do that to all of whichever side you decide to do it. And I did it on my main focal fabric, my theme fabric. So then the next step is now where you're going to pull out that white square that you had drawn your 7-inch into the center of it. See that? So you got this piece here. And now you're going to take your fabric. I'm going to show it on with the yellows because it's got the print on it. The first one you're going to lay down is the one that you haven't done that iron out of the seam. It's the one that you just cut out, but it's not been ironed. And you're going to line up the edges. The most important seam that I want you to focus on is this point right here and this point right here. Because this is all going to be trimmed off, but I want you to make sure you get it all the way up to that line there and that line right here. That's what we're mainly focusing on. So you got this in that border of that 7-inch square that you had drawn into the middle of this. Then you're going to take, and it's right sides up, then you're going to take one of the squares and see how flat that is after I had laid that little clapper on there, and it just was perfect for that. So now I'm just going to have it sit there for a minute because now we get to pull out our Elmer's school glue. Again, line up your edges. You're going to be within that 7-inch square that you had made, your little template. Got this one ready to go. See how they're going to kind of like puzzle piece together? So now you're going to take your Elmer's glue and you're going to open it up, but don't have it wide open. You're just going to have it where it's actually doing little dots. You don't want to just have this massive bead of glue on here because then it's going to bleed out. It's going to get all over everything. So I just take my Elmer's glue and I'm just dotting. I'm going to put it like a little dot all along this edge. You know, probably about an inch or so, a ½ inch. Just dotting it all the way down. Not heavy, just little dots. Then I'm going to take this piece, and I like to start here at this bottom and this piece right here. So it's going to overlap, and then I'm following the line up right here on my template, following that line up and following it across, and then laying this down, that seam down onto that glue. So I'm in that 7-inch area. So now you should see what looks like a 1/4 inch on this end where it's got the color, and then you've got a 1/4 inch of the yellow. So you've got your two differences here. Once that is on there, now you're going to hit it again with the iron. And now you're going to dry and set that glue. And you're going to repeat this for every single one of them. So it should be a total of 28 that you're going to be. Now if you're doing the table runner, it'll be 28. If you're doing the larger one, if you're going to do the big quilt, you're going to be making a total of, let's see, 42. You're going to be doing 42. The table runner measures 19.5 by 54, and the lap quilt is 51 by 54. So you just have it on there just so that glue sets. And then you just peel it off. And it is ready to go. So you're going to repeat that with every single one of them. So I'm going to do one more. So now I'm just going to grab in the pink one. This is a batik, and I'm just again lining it up right there on the edge. Oh, got it this way. Got to go this way. Try to stay within that line of all the ones I've been doing. So I'm making sure that this is at right inside the line of my 7-inch square, and this was right inside the line of the 7-inch square, just like that. Grab my glue and do my tap. Just a little tap every so often. Inch, ½ inch, however you want to do it. You get a little rhythm going. Then you're going to grab your piece, and I like starting at the bottom corner. I lay that there. I follow my line up, follow my line across, and then it just lays right there into place on top of the pink one, top of the other fabric. Again, grab your iron and tap that down. That dries and sets that glue. Of course, if you're using that Elmer's school glue, when you go to wash this quilt for the first time, it's all going to wash out. And then you just peel this off. So after you got them all done, the next step is sewing. So the next step is, now we're going to be doing a little bit of sewing. So what we're looking to do is we're going to be sewing, I'm sewing on the theme fabric. So you're going to be sewing right here 1/16 of an inch away from this edge right here. And that's kind of tough to do, but you're going to be sewing 1/16 of an inch. And now we're still on page 2 of our instructions. So after you get these all cut, that's what you're going to do. You're going to stitch them together by stitching 1/16 from the folded curved edge. So right here. So a lot of machines have a foot that looks like this one. This is the G foot. This is a blind hem foot on this machine. So what I'm doing, I'm putting this one on here, and then I'm going to slide my needle all the way over. So I'm going to actually have this little edge right here. It's going to be gliding along that edge right here. So my needle is going to be sewing right there beside that. So I found that that made it a little bit easier. A stitch in the ditch foot might work also if you have a stitch in the ditch foot where you've got that guide. If you do the 1/4 inch foot where it has that guide on the edge, that would work too. Just have your needle slid as far over as you can get so that you're just barely catching this. And what it is doing, as you're sewing along this right here, catching this folded edge, it's also going to be catching it back here on the back side. So this is how we're making this block without having to sew curves. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use the G foot, which is the this one is the blind hem foot, and I'm popping this on here. But again, if you can just be sure to have it sewing, all you gotta do is just sew 1/16, but having that little bit of a guide is kind of like a little cheater. It really helps with that. And I made my thread. I got black thread and bobbin on here. So by using this, now I've got to slide my needle all the way over. Now I don't want it all the way over. On my machine, I think I set it at 1.5 on here, so it's past the center. And you're just doing a single stitch. You don't have to do no back tacking or anything. You're just stitching all the way down. And I actually made my stitch length a little bit larger because this is like a top stitch, but it's also a sewing stitch, so I don't make it as wide as a typical top stitch. I think which I normally like do 3 or 3.1. I think I have this at 2.8 or 2.7, so it's a little bit wider than a normal top stitch, but not quite as close of a stitch as I would do for normal piecing. And then I'm just going to start sewing all these together. And this is, get these all done. You can chain piece these through. These are real quick to just easily chain piece through. You're just following it along that edge. And then you're just going to feed the next one in. I'm going to do a couple of them here. I got 4 of them quickly sewed together, so it doesn't take no time to sew out the, the 28 if you're doing just the table runner. And the time is taken up in the prep work, but the prep work makes all the difference in being able to do this. So here it is. This is just easily sewn, and look at the back side. It's all sewed down into place. So, I always like to take a look at the back side, make sure everything's all nice and neat and nice and caught, and you can see it's all sewn right there. Just what I want it to do, and you just whip through all of those rather quickly. So now we're going to go back to the table, because now we're going to go ahead and turn these squares into diamonds. Okay, so we just finished page 2. So now we're moving on to page 3. Now we're going to be taking the pieces that we just finished sewing, and now we're going to go ahead and cut them into diamonds. So this is where you're going to grab template C. So you're going to take your pieces, and what you're looking to do with your template is you're going to be lining it up edge to edge. So I find that if I take my points right here and I'm going to put it on this point and I'm going to line up this point right here. I'm lining it up to the very corner right here and the very corner right here. That's where I'm going with the corners on my C. Making sure I have it just right. Because now we're going to be trimming all this off. So pay attention to that. If you do use the fussy cut windows, just remember you're going to be trimming off quite a bit right here. And you don't want to be trimming off something if you use your fussy cut window with this. But you got to get it right there at that edge, right here at this edge. And now you're going to do each block one at a time. And you're just going to trim off this excess right here. And now you've got your block, and you'll see now you got a 1/4 inch here and you got your 1/4 inch here, and you're going to repeat that for all of them. So I'm going to go ahead and get another one done. We'll do this little yellow one right here. Line it up at that edge and at the opposite edge. Just kind of spin it around, making sure I have it right there. I'm not worried about these two so much as I'm worried about the very edges here. Okay. And when you're satisfied with that, then you just go ahead and do your cuts. So here's your next grouping of a little bit of waste that you have. So that's all the blocks. So you're going to do that to all your pieces. So since you have those cut out, now you're going to be cutting out your bottom, your setting triangles. So if you look at this one right here, or say like this one right here, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You got 4 setting triangles, and they actually did in colors. And so you could choose whichever colors. When I was just cutting and I had some extra fabric, I just cut a stack of them. Once you get all of those cut out, then you've got the next thing that you have to cut out. And it is, so that setting triangle is D. That's this one right here. And if I remember correctly, I wanted to make sure that this longer edge, because I think they're different. This is 24, let's see, that's 24, 30, they might be, yeah, the longer edge, I had this longer edge on the straighter grain. So I cut the strips, so if you take a look at the cutting instructions when you were cutting your fabric, back on page 1, it actually tells you, so when you're doing template D, and that is your setting triangles on here, you're going to cut your strip of fabric. I just cut it 8 inches. I just cut an 8-inch strip. No, hold on, I take that back. 5.5 inches. 5.5 inches. I did a 5.5-inch strip, and then I just cut out my these pieces, or part of your fat quarter could be used for that. So that's, and then template D and E. So I'm going to pull those up. This is D, so E and F. So we got E and Fs. So E is the themed stripe fabric that goes on the edges. So it's these pieces. I'm going to pull this piece over so you can see it. It's actually these pieces right here. Here, 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 here. So those pieces are cut 4.25 inches. So I think I just did 4.5-inch pieces, strips. I cut 4.5-inch strips. You need a 4.5-inch strips for your theme and then for your colors. So you got to cut those, and that is template E. Now if you're doing the table runner, you're not going to need F. F is for these pieces right here. But if you're going to be doing the actual big quilt, then you will see you will need it. Those F is, I'm going to pull out the paper, F is these pieces right here, the 4 corners. But we're not doing that one, we're doing the table runner. So it's no F's on here. But if you wanted to square up your table runner, you could add the F's. So that's what those pieces are. So you're going to cut your triangles out of your D. So if I wanted my triangle to be with this one, I'm going to look for my straight of grain. Of course, you put that starch on here, so it's going to be pretty tight. And you're just going to lay your long edge, your longest edge, on that straight of grain and just cut that out. And you're going to need, I can't remember, you only need 4. So you're just going to cut 4 of those out. It could be any color or one color or whatever you want it to be. And then of these pieces, you've got to cut out on here. So of the theme fabric, if you're doing the table runner, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I put this piece right here on the straight of grain, this long edge right here on my straight again. And I also starched those pieces too. So this is my straight of grain. So I cut all those out of my theme and of my color. So those are all done. So now after you have them all cut out, now you're going to start creating your rows. So that puts us into all my instructions. I'm going to go to it. It should be putting us into page 3. So now we're still on page 3 where you did all your cutting. So what I have found the best thing to do next after I've had all of my pieces cut out, now I'm just going to be laying them out. So you are laying them out not like that, even though that is a really cool look. And where's that other one I had made so you could see it? I was playing with the fabric earlier and I thought that was a really, really cool look. I'm going to cut these 2 out so we can, see that pattern. And I thought, so why do we have to stick with the same look? You could change it up by just a matter in the way you turn your pieces. So if I was to just continue on with that wavy look, how cool is that? I mean, but that's not the look that we're looking for. You're wanting all of the waves to be going in the same direction. So it would be turned like this. So I laid all of my pieces out on the table or on the floor or on your design wall and got the look that I want to do. With that being said, I'm going to pull out the one here so you could see how I got this one laid out. You see the one that's behind me? This is just showing it long ways, but I just laid out my pieces and then I got my colors in the way I wanted it to look on this colorway. Here is the other one that I have done, and that's in the demo of what colored ways that we're doing now. So I just laid out all of my pieces, including my side pieces, and what I chose what colors I wanted to have for my my triangles at the top. Laid them all out because you're sewing this in rows like this. This is your row, not this way. You're sewing it together in these long rows. So this is a row, this is a row, this is a row. You're just going to sew all of these rows together. So you pick them up and do your rows sewing. So there's a little trick to sewing these pieces together. So here is, say I got my row here. So I'm picking up this row to do my sewing. So I would stack them all up. So you're going to take this one and you're going to pull it over to do your stitching, to do your sewing. So what you're looking for, and this is where clips or a pin comes into play, you're wanting to have just a peak right here. Now in the instructions, she actually has on the paper, and I'm going to pull out that paper so you can see it because it's kind of important. You can decide how you want to do it. But on the paper patterns, she has registration marks on the paper patterns that we did not put onto the templates. So I'm trying to find, and I think right here. So here's the paper patterns. I'm pulling them out. It's not on this one. It's going to be on C, D, E, and F. See them right here, these little registration marks? They are not on our templates. We did not put them on the templates. Now, if you wanted to use these, if you wanted to use the technique that she talks about, she's lining up these little registration marks that you would have put onto here. So if you wanted to do that and learn that technique, then you would cut these out, and I think I would just lay it down on top of my piece, and I would just on the wrong side, and I would mark those registration marks with this paper after you've already cut it out with a template. That's just another step. So it's on here, we just didn't put them onto the templates, but they do have these registration marks, and that's where some of the confusion is going to be, because you're going to read the instructions, and she talks about matching up these points with a pin. So I just bypassed that completely, and I did what I normally know how to do when I'm going to be sewing two pieces together. You've got to have that little bit of a peekaboo. And in the picture, she actually shows it. So this is the look that we're looking to do right here. Here she's showing it using the pins. I'm not using those pins. I'm just lining up my straight edges here and bringing it to where I know my 1/4 inch is going to start right here. My 1/4 inch is going to start right here at that point, and then I'm going to sew all the way down, and I'm going to come off right here. And if I flip it over, you'll see where this backside peekaboo is right here out. So you're going to be sewing here to here, whichever direction. So you sew your rows together. So you sew this one, and what you're looking at when you open it up is you're going to have this kind of a look here. So I'm going to sew, we're going to go back to the sewing machine, we're going to sew one of these so I can show you how it looks when it's all sewn. Alright, so here I am, I'm getting ready to do this seam right here, and I'm looking for that point right there. That's where I'm going to drop, my needle's going to go. I've got my machine set back up for a 1/4 inch sewing, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch all the way down, and then come off at this point right here where it's going to overlap. Now you can use some pins, you can use some clips to kind of hold it together. Got my machine set up, and I just kind of take it nice and slow, and I like to kind of drop my needle down so I can make sure it's going to be right there at that point that I need it to be. And if you want, you could do a little back tack here, but you're going to be sewing that seam up next too. But there's a little bit of handling, so that's why I want you to be sure to have a very close stitch length, because you're going to be doing a lot more handling as you're getting everything all put together. So when you open it up, I'm just kind of doing a gentle roll back. And I think how I like to press these is I was pressing these to the darker side. I found that was a little bit easier, but I want to have this straight edge going across right here and my straight edge going across right here. So now when I go to sew these together, I got another 1/4 inch here, and I've got my 1/4 inch right here. But that's what you're looking for it to be. So then you've got your next one that you got to sew on. So again, pay attention so you don't have it going in that orientation. You're going to turn it to be this way. Same thing, you're going to lay this on, and you're going to have it where it's just peeking out over the top, and where it's going to see that little bit of an intersection is going to be a 1/4 inch in right here, and then you're going to come off on the other end at that exact same point. No stretching, no pulling, just let the machine just guide it through. And by starching all this fabric, you're not dealing with any of that stretchiness of a bias. So there's my seam, and then when I go to roll this back, Actually, I'm going to talk to you about that. Let me grab the instructions because this is important. You need to see this. I kept these instructions beside me every step of the way as I was doing my making this, because she actually goes into instructions right here. I want you to see this. As you're putting your rows together, and I had started, I believe, at the bottom piece. She has it listed on here, the direction that you are going to press your seams. So this is important. So if this was, say, row 1, I would be pressing them to the left. If I was doing row 2, to the right. So it's back and forth. This is very important to pay attention to it. So I knew it wasn't just to the dark side. I couldn't remember why I had done that. But yes, what you're going to have each row pressed in the opposite direction, because then when you go put the rows together, your seams are going to nest nicely. So if this one is pressed in that direction, so then this one has got to be pressed in that direction also. So you just got to be sure each row has that direction that it needs to be pressed at. And again, you're looking for, once you get your things, your piece sewn, that you got your 1/4 inch here and that you got your 1/4 inch right here to do your rows. And you're going to continue sewing all of those rows together till you get them all finished. And then you're going to go, that's finishing up page 4. So then you're going to go to page 5. Let me see if I can find that. Page 5 is just talking about the quilt, same thing. They go into detail about direction of doing your pressing. So that's really important. And then page 6, right here. So when you finally get to page 6, you know, however, it's your preference. If you wanted to make this where it's a stitch and flip, you could do a stitch and flip. If you wanted to have your backing and binding on it, you could do your backing and binding. So we're going to go ahead and go back to the table, and we'll get this all finished up and wrapped up for you. So here's what it looks like all stitched out. Now there's something else I need for you to pay attention to on that when you're doing your stitching in together, because you're going to see that and look really closely at this picture when you're doing it, because that's going to make a lot of difference when you're sewing your rows together. Because you could see right here, like she's lining them up perfectly like here, but see, she's got little bitty overhangs right here when she's attaching D's and E's, which is the setting triangles. You can see she's wanting the seam that's going to be in the center, like right here, to be straight, and she's got these little overhangs, and here they are. There's my little bit of overhangs. That is that image right there. So then as you're going through, you're going to have these little bitty overhangs that's coming out at the end of the rows, and she's going to point out where you need to be seeing these going to be a little bit overhangs, because when it's all finished and done, because you'll be cutting all those off anyway. So just follow closely the image that she has used here as a guide for not only for your pressing, but as you see when you're doing your pieces, where you're going to see they don't line up perfectly because they are cut a little bit big, so that you can do the trimming of it off. Now another thing I wanted to point out is when you go to do your quilting. So you can quilt this any way you want, and then here, I'm just going to flip it over. Here's the back side showing all of my seams all nicely pressed in one direction. So I have my alternates going on here when I'm sewing my rows together, and then when I did my final pressing, I just had them all pressed to the one side. Now what I've done here to do my quilting, like I did on the one that's hanging on the wall, I just did a stitch in the ditch, and you have several different options. You could stitch in the ditch along your seam lines here. And that's what I had found it was easier for me to do. I did a stitch in a ditch. So I did it so I was on the dark side of every row. So I'm doing these rows here, but I did it with the dark side. So I'm stitching right here along this edge here, and then I'm stitching it on the inside of the dark side here. So the stitches are not even showing up at all on the color. You know, it's like a big grid that's on here. because my stitching is on the dark. You don't even see it on any of the color accent pieces. It's just all in the dark. You could do it the opposite way. You could quilt this any way you want. And then after it's all quilted to whatever specific, that's how you want it to look, then you just trim it up and put your binding on. I just did machine binding. You can hand bind it. So pretty much that is the dancing diamonds that you guys have been asking for forever. And like you, I was intimidated by it because I thought I was going to be sewing these crazy curves. And I'm good at sewing curves, but I thought that was just a little bit more difficult, something more difficult than I wanted to do right now. But once I dug into the pattern and wrapped my brain around the instructions, because that took a little bit of time for me just to wrap my brain around it because it's so different than what I thought it was going to be. But once I started getting into the groove, it goes quickly. The longest part for me was just all the prep work. Once the prep work's done, then everything else just breezes right through. It is a fun project to make, and it looks a lot more difficult than what it is. And again, it's teaching you a fast and fun new technique. Again, this is the Dancing Diamonds, Tiger Lily Press, and the designer is Nicole C. Chambers Kaya. So thank you so much for joining me today. Go to Martelli Notions, pick up any of the tools and supplies that you would need to be able to make this project. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.